deep dive. Today we're focusing on the NAACP, a really pivotal organization, obviously, in the fight for civil rights.
Absolutely. Founded way back 1909, I think.
That's right, 1909, born out of just, well, appalling racial violence and discrimination.
And for over a century now, they've been this relentless force, haven't they? Using legal challenges, grassroots action, public advocacy.
Yeah, really hitting it from all angles.
And you look back, the victories are undeniable. I mean, dismantling Jim Crow laws.
Huge.
Getting the Civil Rights Act of 1964 passed. These were massive shifts.
Absolutely central to it all. But, you know, here we are in the 21st century. Things are different.
Yeah.
And that kind of brings us to the core of our deep dive today. Is the NAACP still making a real difference now?
It's a fair question.
We've been looking at a recent article that really digs into this. So our goal is to sort of unpack what they're doing now, the challenges they're up against.
And really assess if they're still, relevant, impactful.
Exactly. We want to give you some focused insights, not just drown you in facts. Okay, so maybe we should start by looking back a bit at the foundation.
Good idea. You really have to understand their early strategy. They were incredibly smart about using the legal system.
Right, that focus on challenging segregation in the courts.
Yeah, and that whole strategy, it built up over time, leading eventually to the big one, Brown v. Board of Education in '54.
Declaring segregated schools unconstitutional. Monumental.
It was, but what's really fascinating, I think, is how they built that case. It wasn't overnight. It was decades of careful legal work, chipping away.
Laying the groundwork piece by piece.
Exactly, crafting these meticulous arguments.
But like you hinted, it wasn't just courtrooms.
No, definitely not. They were also crucial on the ground, organizing protests, boycotts.
Those vital voter registration drives.
So it was this dual approach, really. Top-down legal change and bottom-up community empowerment.
And then that's where their influence started to broaden out, wasn't it? Beyond just the legal and political.
Totally.
Yeah.
They became this incredibly important platform for Black voices, especially when those voices were being systematically shut down.
Amplifying culture, fostering solidarity.
Yeah, and that cultural influence itself was a powerful challenge to the racist ideas of the time. But, as the article we looked at points out, the fight itself it's evolved.
It really has. We've shifted, maybe not entirely, but largely away from those overt Jim Crow laws.
Right.
Towards something more, I don't know, insidious, systemic racism.
Yeah, baked into the institutions. You see it in criminal justice, education, healthcare.
Yeah.
The disparities are stark.
So that amazing mid-century playbook, while foundational, needs adapting, right, for these more embedded problems.
Which leads to the big question. How does an organization with that much history pivot? How do they adapt?
And the political climate doesn't help.
No kidding. The article talks about political polarization, making it way harder to build those broad coalitions you need for big changes.
Finding common ground feels almost impossible sometimes.
It does.
Yeah.
And then you throw social media into the mix.
Ugh. Yes, the double-edged sword.
Exactly. Amazing for spreading awareness, organizing quickly.
But also a breeding ground for misinformation, for division, stuff that can really undermine their work.
It's a constant battle to cut through that noise.
And another big piece, connecting with younger generations. Millennials, Gen Z.
They're passionate, definitely. But their activism often looks different, right? More decentralized, very digital.
So for the NAACP, with its, let's say, more traditional structure, how do you bridge that gap? How do you bring those younger activists into the fold effectively?
It's critical. They need to connect that historic legacy with these newer approaches.
So, okay, how are they tackling these modern challenges? The article gives some specific examples of what they're focused on now.
Yeah, it does. Police reform is a big one, where they've maintained really strong leadership.
Responding to all these high-profile incidents of police violence?
Exactly, and pushing for concrete policy changes, not just talk. Trying to get at that racial bias in law enforcement.
So things like mandatory implicit bias training?
Yes, and pushing hard for body cameras everywhere. Transparency.
And real accountability when officers cross the line. That seems key.
Absolutely. They're lobbying for these specific things at all levels, local, state, federal.
Okay, what else? The article mentioned COVID-19 as well?
Oh, absolutely. The pandemic just threw these deep inequities into such sharp relief, didn't it? Especially in Black communities.
Healthcare access, economic impacts. It was brutal.
And the NAACP really stepped up. They weren't just watching, they were advocating.
For things like getting more testing into those communities.
Testing, equitable vaccine distribution. Remember how patchy that was early on? And pushing for economic relief that actually targeted the hardest-hit families and businesses.
So leveraging their national voice, but also working with local partners.
Exactly. Ground game combined with policy influence. It shows that adaptability.
And then there's the issue that just never seems to go away, voting rights.
Always central to their mission, and unfortunately, more relevant than ever recently.
Yeah, with all these restrictive voting laws popping up in different states.
Laws that often disproportionately impact minority voters, making it harder to cast a ballot.
So what's the NAACP's response there? Is it still the registration drives?
That's definitely part of it. Voter registration is crucial, but they're also hitting it legally.
Challenging these laws in court.
Yes, arguing they're unconstitutional. And they're lobbying hard at the federal level, too, trying to get legislation like the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act passed.
To restore some of those protections, it's a multi-front battle.
It really is. And alongside all that, there's a strong focus on economic empowerment.
Tackling the racial wealth gap.
Right. Because, true equality isn't just about laws. It's about economic opportunity, too.
So what does that look like in practice? Are they giving out loans or?
It's more about sustainable change. Supporting Black-owned businesses, yes, sometimes with grants or mentorship programs.
Okay.
But also advocating for bigger picture policies, things that promote wealth building in communities that have been historically left behind.
Aiming for that long-term economic independence.
Exactly. And what's interesting reading the article is how they manage to operate on so many levels at once.
Right. It's not just policy or just economics. There's a broader cultural piece, too.
Yeah, the article touches on that.
Yeah.
They serve as this kind of moral compass, reminding society that the fight for equality isn't over.
The Image Awards are probably the most visible example of that, right?
For sure. Celebrating Black excellence in entertainment and culture.
But it's more than just awards, isn't it? It's about shaping narratives, pushing for positive representation in media.
Which has a huge impact on public perception.
Yeah.
And you can't forget the local chapters.
Like grassroots level.
Absolutely vital.
Mm.
That's where the national agenda gets translated into local action, addressing specific community needs. It fosters leadership from the ground up.
And when you put that local strength together with their national reach.
That's where you see their power to mobilize people. Rallies, petitions, digital campaigns now, too.
Right.
They can really bring public pressure.
And they don't do it alone, right? Partnerships seem important.
Very. The article mentions alliances with other advocacy groups, faith organizations, even corporations sometimes. Building those coalitions broadens their reach and impact.
Okay. But it can't all be smooth sailing. An organization this old, this significant, there must be challenges. The article addressed some of those.
Oh, yeah. Funding is always a big one for nonprofits.
Always. Relying on donations, grants.
And there's more competition for those resources now with newer social justice movements emerging. So securing consistent funding is a constant task.
And just staying relevant, right? The world changes so fast.
Exactly. The need to innovate, adapt strategies. What worked 20 years ago might not be the best approach today, with technology and politics shifting so quickly.
They have to keep evolving.
And then there are the internal dynamics. Any big organization deals with this.
Different opinions on strategy, leadership decisions.
Yeah, potential criticisms, balancing the needs, expectations of, longtime members versus newer supporters. It takes skillful leadership to navigate that.
So wrapping this up, let's circle back to that main question we started with. Is an NAACP still making a difference today?
Based on everything we've looked at, I think the answer has to be yes. A clear yes.
Their impact through advocacy, community work, just their sheer presence, it's still significant.
Definitely. The challenges are real, no doubt.
Yeah.
But look at their history. They know how to adapt, how to persevere. They're still tackling the big issues: voter suppression, economic inequality.
And it's crucial for you listening to remember, this isn't just their fight.
Right. The article really frames it as a collective responsibility. It's a call to action for everyone.
We all have a part to play in building a more just society.
And there are concrete ways to support the NAACP if you feel moved to. Joining a local chapter, donating if you can.
Even just sharing their campaigns, amplifying their message.
Every little bit helps.
And beyond the NAACP itself, just engaging in that wider pursuit of justice, right? Voting, advocating for change, supporting marginalized groups in your own community.
That's how we honor that legacy, that mission.
So maybe a final thought for you to take away, reflecting on this incredible story of resilience and impact spanning over a century.
What role will you choose to play in this ongoing fight for equality, for justice? What's your part going to be?
Something to think about long after this deep dive ends.